Hi everyone, my name is Jim and I provide fast effective relief from the heartburn of people problems. Today I am going to be talking about a very divisive subject that is
Banter.
Yes, nothing splits opinions more than banter. Is it a healthy sign of a happy and vibrant workplace? Or is it camouflage for something darker and more insidious? Discrimination, harassment and bullying? Or is it somewhere in between? There is a grey area here, and so I'm going to use this video to talk about banter from my perspective and share my opinions with you. Standard disclaimers apply. This is my opinion. Your opinion may vary, but this is mine. Okay, let's get into it. I'm going to start with a dictionary definition of banter. Most dictionaries define banter in pretty much the same way, which is that it is a playful and friendly exchange of teasing remarks. I'm going to extend that definition, and I'll explain it why, because I'm going to analyze it a bit more closely. For me, banter is the playful and friendly exchange of teasing remarks between consenting parties of equal status or position. Now let me explain what I mean by that. I'm going to start at the beginning of that definition with playful and friendly. So, banter should be playful and friendly, ideally, but we have to ask ourselves, are the comments that are being said really playful and friendly? Now, you can categorize banter in three ways. There is innocent banter, which is genuinely playful and friendly, and with no harsh edges or barbs. There is ignorant banter. This is where somebody says something offensive, distressing, or upsetting, but they didn't mean it. They genuinely didn't mean it. And typically in those situations, when they find out they've hurt someone's feelings, they will apologize. They'll feel bad about it. The third most dangerous type of banter is the malicious banter. This is where someone has quite deliberately set out to humiliate someone, to hurt their feelings, and what they've done is created a smokescreen. They've used banter as the camouflage to carry out that act against somebody else. The other thing you'll typically find in that situation is that the person who's making the other person miserable, it typically does it with an audience. So people that set out to humiliate others don't often do it in private. They like to have colleagues around to witness it. So the first thing to check is that the comments being made really are playful and friendly, sincerely so. The second part of that is consenting parties. We assume that everybody that participates in banter is consenting. You see the back and forth, the repartee in an office or workplace or whatever. And we assume that everybody is participating on consenting and equal terms. But are they really consenting? When there's some banter going on, when there's some teasing going on, it's very difficult and quite uncomfortable to be the person that says, I'm not comfortable with this. I don't want to participate. I don't like it. So we tend to smile and laugh it off and go along with it, even if we're not really enjoying it. So we have to check another assumption there. Are the people engaging in banter really enjoying it? Are they really consenting to it? Certainly the person that's on the receiving end of the banter in question. And the last part of the definition that I described was that the banter should be between parties of equal status or position. This is very important, and I think it's something that's overlooked both in the dictionary definition and when people talk about banter generally. You see, it is a very different thing to have a little bit of to and fro, a little bit of taking the mick between two people who are peers within the workplace. They're of equal status, they're of more or less equal seniority. But what if you have a junior or a new hire who's on the receiving end of banter from an established crowd of other employees, maybe more senior employees? They're not really on equal terms. It's going to be even more uncomfortable and difficult for that junior or new hire to possibly cope with it, or certainly to resist what's being said. And if it's a manager or a supervisor or somebody in authority, it gets even worse. Can you imagine being teased by a manager? How will that feel? How will it make you feel when other people are witnessing it? It can be quite humiliating. It can really damage your sense of dignity and respect. So I think it's really important to understand that banter on unequal terms is a particularly dangerous thing. So let's move on now and look a bit more at the manifestation of banter in the workplace. There are some practical issues we need to think about when it comes to how banter manifests in the workplace. Specifically, banter can take on a sharp edge, a dark edge, very, very easily. What starts out as a playful and friendly exchange, at least on the surface, can rapidly become a little bit more pointed. You see, nobody really likes, being the butt of a joke. I mean, we might all laugh it off at first, oh, ha, 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 very funny, etc., etc. But let's face it, it doesn't take long before the joke becomes rather tired and old and then unpleasant. And also, if there's anything going on, any dynamic there, any conflict or friction between two individuals, I mean, this can cause banter to take on a definite hard edge. And this is undesirable. The other thing with banter is people will often, incorporate insults into their banter, and it's very difficult to come up with an ad hominem insult that doesn't sooner or later start to stray into more discriminatory areas, such as the protected classes. We don't want to be insulting people on the basis of their race, their religion, their sexual orientation, and so on and so forth. But it's very easy to do, and it happens a lot in the course of banter. This, of course, is a red flag. It's not acceptable by any of the normal standards of personal behaviour. And the people engaging in this banter might think, well, it's okay, it's just a joke, I'm just having fun. But the person on the receiving end might not be finding it quite so enjoyable. Now, the problem is it's very difficult for people to complain about banter because they don't want to be seen as the killjoy or accused of one. They don't want to get the reputation of someone who goes running to mummy to make a complaint or anything like that. And in particular, as I said at the start of this video, if there's some unequal status, if it's somebody in authority or someone who's very senior that's engaging in the banter, it can be difficult for the victim, I shall use that term, it's difficult for the victim to really feel comfortable about standing up and saying something about it. As a result, it can tend to continue if management don't intervene, and you risk ending up with a corrosive and toxic workplace culture. Now, that doesn't mean people can't have fun or tell jokes or, even mildly take the piss out of each other. But there are ways of telling jokes and having fun and teasing each other without being insulting and resorting to ad hominems and the rest of this. I mean, you can tell a joke without being offensive. And I think there's a couple of key points around this. And the first thing to remember is that you should always know your audience. It's very easy, and I will confess I've been guilty of this in the past myself, is, you clown around, you say stuff, you think of something witty and hilarious to say, but you don't know everybody in your audience, in the group around you. You don't know them all equally well. And so you might say something that you don't think is offensive, or at least would not be taken as offensive by the people that you do know. But there could be somebody there, and it could even be just someone who's overhearing you on the periphery, who is offended by what you say. Now, I know that there is the argument that just because somebody is offended doesn't mean we should necessarily assume that that offense is genuine. And people like to try, or some people like to try and say that, that there are certain people that are prone to take offense at anything, no matter how insignificant. Well, it is true that there is an element of context that has to be taken into account. We're going to look at some case studies later, and you'll see an example of banter which did include insults and what would otherwise be harassing language, but within that particular context was considered not to be offensive. But generally speaking, you're on thin ice if you are going to make offensive remarks with people that you don't know. The other issue is that when you are interacting with people in the office, you have to remember that there is a difference between being friendly and being friends. Just because somebody is friendly with you, that doesn't mean they're your buddy. So people will be friendly for obvious reasons. They want to have a cordial and friendly work environment, but again, that doesn't mean that they want to be your drinking buddy. They don't want to hear your dirty jokes, and they don't want to be pulled into whatever sense of humor that you've got going on. Not necessarily. There's a difference between how you talk to a friendly co-worker versus how you might talk to a friend in a bar or in the privacy of your own home. So again, this all comes back to knowing your audience. When it comes to banter that goes wrong, typically there are one of a handful of defenses that people will make. The most common being, It's only banter. I was only joking. It was just a joke. I didn't mean anything by it. Now, as I said right at the start, there is innocent banter, which is genuinely playful and friendly, and there is ignorant banter, and this is the one where somebody said something, they meant it honestly as a joke, but were just ignorant to the fact that it could and did cause offence. But then, of course, you've got the malicious banter, and the problem is that people engaging in malicious banter use exactly the same defence. What's even more discomforting is that typically people who use the "it's only banter" phrase extend that by trying to say, look, if you got offended, there must be something wrong with you because it's only banter.
Uh-oh, Meg. It's a sensitivity mob.
It was just a joke.
And then, they're trying to reframe it to almost make it a victim blaming thing. It's the victim's fault. It's the complainant's fault. It's the person who was offended. It's their fault that they got offended. And, people say, this is who I am. It's my sense of humor. I just say it how it is. People can take it or leave it. And these people kind of need to go on a Copernican revolution and realize that, the universe does not orbit around them. And there are other people's feelings to take into account. After all, if we need to accommodate someone who is just this way and that's how they are, well, why isn't it fair to expect them to accommodate other people's sensitivities? I think the golden rule to remember above everything else, is that absolutely everybody has the right to be treated with dignity and respect at work. Now, if you say or do something that violates the dignity and respect of a co-worker, you are in the wrong. It doesn't matter whether you meant it or not, you are in the wrong. Now, the corrective action for those sorts of events does depend on, to a certain extent, on whether you meant it or not. But just remember, dignity and respect for everybody. And as long as you remember that, you can't go far wrong. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk through some real cases where banter went horribly wrong in the workplace. The first one is going to be Austin and Samuel Grant, and this involves an employee who worked as a salesperson, and he was talking with his managers at the office, and they were discussing football, and this individual, Mr. Austin, he said, well, I don't like football. And his manager said, oh, well, yeah, you must be gay then, and started basically teasing him about his sexual orientation, and carried that pattern on throughout his employment by referring to him in various ways as being some homosexual, all on the basis of the fact that he didn't like football. Now, as it turns out, Mr. Austin is straight. He's not gay, but that's not the point. They kept, accusing him of this and using this as a sort of an insult when interacting with him. He raised a complaint, he raised a grievance. The grievance was not upheld. He appealed. The appeal was turned down, so he eventually resigned and basically took the company to a tribunal on the basis of discrimination. And he won. And he won because they really did tease the guy and harass him, but also it was found to be discrimination because they were basically teasing him on the basis of a protected class, his sexual orientation, in this case, accusing him of being gay. Now, not only does this show how banter was not accepted as a defense for why they were behaving in this way to Mr. Austin, it also shows that when it comes to protected classes, you don't actually have to have that protected characteristic in order to be discriminated against. Now, in this case, Mr. Austin wasn't gay, but the fact that they were using that language when they were interacting with him was still classed as discrimination. So, it's not banter, it was harassment, and it was discrimination. Let's look at another case. This is the case of Harper and Housing 21. In this case, Miss Harper is an Irish lady working for a new manager, Miss James. And the problem here is that Miss James would make repeated comments about Miss Harper having a funny accent, or being an Irish gypsy, or reminding Miss James of a character from, the TV show, My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, that sort of theme. And these comments distressed Miss Harper. She raised a grievance, but was on sick. And in fact, before the grievance was even completed, she resigned and sued her employer for constructive unfair dismissal and discrimination. and she won. The defense that it was only banter was not accepted by the tribunal, because they looked at the circumstances and context and they could see that she was being harassed by those terms. Now let's look at the next case. Here we have the case of Minto and Wernick Event Hire. Working for this employer, Miss Minto was subjected to a daily stream of sexual innuendo and sort of banter that was in line with what you might hear in a carry-on movie, for those of you that are old enough to remember what a carry-on movie is. But the tribunal did not agree that this sort of banter was acceptable, even though the manager said, look, you know, in this company, in this sort of industry, this sort of language is commonplace, it is standard practice, it is, you know, it has become accepted. They did not accept that that was a suitable excuse for the banter, and they said, no, it is sexual harassment and discrimination, and the employer lost the case. But that's not all bad news. Let's look at a case where actually the banter was found to be context appropriate, let's put it that way. This final case is Evans and Exactly Corporation. Now this is one for those of you that think that it's the end of banter as we know it. Now in this case, the complainant was a gentleman of a, shall we say, a more portly stature, allegedly a little overweight, and part of the banter that was going on in the workplace was about him being a fat ginger or a salad dodger and what have you. And he complained about this and went to tribunal, similar to the two cases that I mentioned before. The difference is that in the context of what was going on, there was an exchange of banter going on between people of approximately equal status that Mr. Evans was a consenting party to. And evidence was put forward to show that he was engaging in the banter and using equivalently offensive language and sometimes, you know, quite explicit vulgarities. And as such, the tribunal said, no, within the context of the banter that you have willingly participated in and engaged in reciprocally, that does not mean you can then just take a claim for your receiving part of the banter. In other words, you can't just complain about the stuff that you have been on the receiving end of and just sort of conveniently disregard the stuff that you've been dishing out. So there is consideration given to the context in which banter occurs. But I don't want this to suggest that it's okay to have offensive remarks thrown around just in a workplace, provided that everybody's engaging in them. That's probably not a safe route forward when it comes to managing banter. But anyway, the whole point of this video has been to highlight the dangers of banter in the workplace and how easy it is to jump across that line. And so what I want to do is I just want to revisit that golden rule I mentioned earlier around dignity and respect. As long as everybody remembers that everyone in the workplace is entitled to be treated with dignity and respect, and as long as you follow that rule, you're probably not going to go far wrong. If you want another rule that's good to live by is just to think, is there any chance that somebody could be offended by this, even if I think it's a fine statement? And if there's any doubt, well, there's no doubt. Don't say it. Anyway, I'd be really interested to hear your comments on banter in the workplace. Let me know what you've experienced, or let me know what your opinion is on the topic. Do you think the fun police have gone crazy? Or do you think there is still a problem with bullying and harassment in the workplace disguised or camouflaged as banter? Also, if you're enjoying this content, if you'd like to hear more from me, then please do hit that subscribe button, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. All right, cheers.